Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin. Let me tell you about heartache and the loss of God. Wandering, wandering in hopeless night. Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here we is stone, immaculate.
Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm.
I'm Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times. Anyway, Midnight Express, which is our next film, is anything but slow-paced. It's the violent and terrifying story of a young American kid who tries to smuggle hashish out of Turkey and winds up with a life sentence. The movie is more or less based on the real-life story of Billy Hayes, who was arrested and jailed in Turkey in 1970 and escaped in 1975. Well, the 5 years in prison were sheer hell for Billy Hayes. He was beaten and brutalized, and the only thing that kept him going was the hope of a successful appeal or an escape. Now, in this scene, his girlfriend comes to visit him and to smuggle him some $100 bills.
You've got to get out of here. Oh.
Well, right there is the turning point of the whole movie, because the money hidden in that book is Billy's first step on the road out of prison. And the escape in the film didn't happen that way in real life. In fact, Midnight Express doesn't totally follow the facts, and the movie is much too eager to make the Turks into totally sadistic neo-Nazi bad guys. But somehow those are criticisms you come up with afterwards. Watching Midnight Express is a totally involving process. We're terrified and repelled by the violence in that prison, and yet somehow at the same time the prison becomes a microcosm of the world outside. So a lot of questions can be raised about Midnight Express, but it is a well-made thriller, it's a violent shocker, and it's never boring.
Well, I did have a lot of questions raised by the film, and I thought it played kind of fast and loose with the facts. The only reason I bothered to check, right at the beginning of the picture, they have a card on the screen that says, based on a true story. At the end of the picture, a similar kind of thing. If they're going to claim to be truthful and try to impress me, I'm going to challenge them on being truthful.
Well, you're right. If they are being dishonest, if they want people to accept the picture as a documentary of what happened to Billy Hayes. But I think most of the people going to see this picture don't even care if there really is a Billy Hayes or not. They're involved in the story of this young American kid. They get wrapped up in it. It works. It's a success.
See, I think by overloading it, by making it so horrible in the prison, like you said, that they changed this kid into a hero. I don't think he was a hero. All I think he was a survivor.
He was a survivor, and he was a drug smuggler, but it's kind of like the bad guys in a Hitchcock film. Because the camera follows them and their story, you identify with him. So he was a smuggler. At the same time, you want him to get out of prison.
Okay, it thrilled you, didn't thrill me. Well, my dog of the week is The Hand, a laughable horror film about a cartoonist, Michael Caine, who loses his hand in a car accident. Caine and everybody else in the film is worried about the hand because it crawls away from him after the accident, and it could be lurking anywhere. Worse yet, the hand ends up acting out all the negative feelings Caine has toward his wife and anyone else who gets in his way. Now, I know this is supposed to be a psychological thriller with the hand as some kind of metaphor, but I thought the story was so ridiculous that I just kept laughing every time I saw the disembodied hand crawling around. Supposedly, it follows Michael Caine from New England to Nevada, and just the idea of the hand crawling over the expressways and the interstates, it still makes me laugh.
Do you think it signals its turn?
It might say. Okay. Conan the Barbarian is the first of the summer's big new action pictures, a comic book-style fantasy, sword fights, with bodybuilder Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the title role, a barbarian angry at the world in general, and James Earl Jones in particular. He's a bad guy in a lot of films. He killed Conan's mother. In an effort to get back at Jones, Conan is joined by an Oriental martial arts expert and by a woman, a very strong, beautiful woman named Valeria, played by Broadway dancer Sandal Bergman. Here, the two men meet her for the first time.
You don't even have a rope. Two fools who laugh at death. Do you know what horrors lie beyond that wall?
No.
Then you go first.
Eventually, Conan the Barbarian and Valeria, the woman warrior, his equal in spirit, fall in love.
You and I, we have warmth. That's so hard to find in this world. Please, let someone else pass by in the night. Let us take the world by the throat and make it give us what we desire.
From humor to a little passion, this film has a lot, I think. Later in the film, all three join forces, and wearing war paint, they raid James Earl Jones's castle where, what else? An orgy is going on. I think I could have done with a little less music. It sort of softens the appeal of what's going on. However, the appeal of this traditional revenge picture is that it has a good sense of humor, in addition to all of the traditional elements of sword fights, stampeding horses, strong, beautiful men and women fighting for good to triumph over evil. Conan the Barbarian certainly may be predictable, very few surprises, but its funny moments, I think, keep it all fresh. It's lighthearted, enjoyable, and a pretty good summer movie.
Now, on this one, I see the sense of humor. I did not think The Sword and the Sorcerer gave me too much to laugh about, but also in this one, what Conan does that made me like the film and recommend it is it puts Conan and Valeria into the foreground, and also the James Earl Jones character.
Right.
They become people, to a greater degree anyway than in other films like this. I would still like a little more complexity in their development, but we can identify with them. We get to know them a little bit. We think we know how they'll respond to a situation. They are not simply cardboard robots moving from one elaborate set to the next one.
I think that's true. You know, we talked once before about what makes good acting, and we quoted George C. Scott, who talked about the joy of performing quality that an actor can show, how they silently can give off the fact that they know this is fun and they're performing for you. I think Schwarzenegger does this. I think he's aware that his accent sounds totally out of place, even though he's some foreign-born...
But this movie takes place before American accents.
Apparently. And I think that also the woman character, Sandahl Bergman, also senses that she's sort of more than just a good friend. She's going to fight there, too. And I think it has a lot of fun to it in the performance.
You've made me think of something that I didn't really realize I was thinking of while I was watching the film, and that is one of the things I reacted to was the good health and good spirits of Sandahl Bergman and Arnold Schwarzenegger. They are so alive in this film that they bring energy to scenes that otherwise might have been totally routine. Our next movie has a famous title. It's called Scarface, but only the title has any resemblance to the 1932 classic starring Paul Muni, the title and also the theme of self-destruction. This is a modern gangster movie about a tough young Cuban, a convict who's allowed by Castro to take one of those refugee boats to Florida, where in 1981 he begins to build a criminal drug empire by dealing in cocaine. The Cuban is played by Al Pacino. He muscles in on the established drug-dealing establishment, and in this scene he even proposes marriage to the girlfriend of one of South Florida's godfathers.
I come from a gutter. I know that. I got no education, but that's okay. I know the street, and I'm making all the right connections. With the right woman, there's no stopping me. I could go right to the top.
At that moment, Pacino had it all together, but later on in the movie, totally wasted by drug abuse, he's a sitting duck in a mob-controlled nightclub. It's sort of in the great tradition of the Warner Brothers gangster movies of the 30s, and Al Pacino is very good in Scarface. This performance is a return to greatness for an actor who seemed to lose his way in recent years. After his great early performances in movies like The Godfather and Dog Day Afternoon, Pacino started turning up in easy money movies like Bobby Deerfield and Author. Terrible movies. But now here he is creating an unforgettable character, Tony Montana, a tough, cruel, hateful, ambitious criminal who thinks he knows everything, but he doesn't know when to stop. Scarface has been involved in a controversy over its R rating. The ratings board originally wanted to rate this movie X for the violence in it, but they lost on appeal, and it's rated R. It is a violent movie. It's very tough and rough and not appropriate for younger audiences, but it's also a very good movie, and the violence isn't for exploitation. It's an important part of this story, and it's a good movie, I think.
You know, it's funny, I didn't like the movie at all.
At all?
Except for one aspect, and it has to do with the violence. I think that some of the shootout sequences in this film are some of the most beautifully choreographed things, showing what happens in a violent situation, including the first shootout, which I guess really got hacked a little bit up by this rating because they took out some of the most gruesome scenes, and it's still pretty gruesome. But the rest of the movie, other than the violence, I found empty. I found, at one point, he marries that woman, and I can give that away. He marries that woman, and she calls him at the end a boring guy at the end of the picture, and I thought, yes, tremendously boring from the beginning of the movie. And I just want to compare this film to the
No, wait a minute. Now, he's not boring at all.
Yeah, fabulously boring.
He is fabulously boring. At the beginning, he's extremely interesting because he's this hustler who gets off the boat, and he's got to think faster and be tougher than anybody else to make his way in the drug trade.
Right.
By the end of the movie, he's boring for a very specific reason, which is he is totally spaced out on cocaine. He has made the key mistake of using his own stuff. Instead of dealing it, he uses it. So he's boring for that reason.
No, I found him totally uninteresting. I want to compare it to an obvious comparison, The Godfather.
Sure.
In the beginning of The Godfather, when Al Pacino is in that uniform, and he says he's not part of the family, he's a different character, there's a fascinating dynamic there. And so what happens to Pacino's character in that movie, which is sort of ending up the same kind of way, that's a fall from, if not greatness, it's a fall from goodness, and it's interesting. Just let me finish. In this movie, we have a fall from louseness.
So what?
Well, it's just not interesting, Roger.
Do you think there's some rule that says the guy has to be good at the beginning so he can be bad at the end?
No,
this guy
I say it's more interesting.
He's a criminal when he gets off the boat.
That's exactly right.
Then he has,
an uninteresting criminal.
He has a criminal's version of the American dream, which is get a lot of money, build a big house, and marry this blonde,
That's right?
And then, because of the drugs and because of his own fatal flaws, it all comes crashing down. So it's the story of a guy who's bad at the beginning, bad in the middle, and worse at the end. What's wrong with that?
Who cares? I didn't care about him in the slightest. His life meant nothing to me.
There are a lot of people like this guy, I think, and their lives mean a lot in this world. That's why
all of the famous gangster films are not about louses who got lousier. Some of them are about interesting characters who got lousier.
That's a historical footnote, but it's not a criticism of this film.
It's a criticism of this movie because it doesn't compare with its obvious comparison to The Godfather.
Year of the Dragon tells a story of a fight for control of the rackets in New York's Chinatown between an older generation that's more conservative, that has worked for a long time with the Italian mafia, and a young, hot-blooded Chinese mafioso leader who wants to start bringing in more drugs and being more aggressive and fighting the Italian mafia for control of the area. This creates a gang war, and into the middle of this situation steps a police detective played by Mickey Rourke, who in this scene literally wades right into the middle of things when he finds 2 dead bodies in a bean sprout factory. In this scene, Rourke confronts the leaders of the Chinese criminal community and tells them that Chinatown is going to have to clean up its act.
You think gambling, extortion, corruption are kosher? Because it's 1,000 years old? This is America you're living in, and it's 200 years old, so you better get your clocks fixed. You're not special, and you're not beyond the law any more than the Puerto Ricans or the Polacks.
He gets aggressive and leads a strike force that breaks into the gambling dens of Chinatown, gambling areas that had traditionally been left alone by the police for generations.
Mr. Tai, can you tell us if there is such a thing as the Chinese mafia?
Sounds very exciting, like a comic book.
The existence of triads is documented by the Drug Enforcement Agency.
Documentation without proof. This farce is further evidence of the consistent discrimination against Chinese in this country.
That television reporter there is played by an actress named Ariane, and there's a love interest between the two of them, between Ariane and Mickey Rourke in this movie, and that's only one of the many subplots in this film, including the story of Mickey Rourke and his fight with his estranged wife, and Mickey Rourke and his battles with his superiors, and the young Chinese leaders and their trips to the Far East in order to bring back heroin. There is so much in this movie that sometimes you get confused. The movie is structurally a mess. Scenes fit in places where you can't really figure out why they came in there instead of earlier. But despite all of that confusion, Year of the Dragon is so entertaining and occasionally so funny and indeed so violent that it does work as a movie. And so I give it 3 stars, and I'm Roger Ebert.
Our first film, Salvador, is loosely based on tragic events in Latin America during the early part of this decade. Right-wing death squads murdered thousands, including an archbishop and 4 United States nuns. Salvador, like Under Fire and The Killing Fields before it, argues that America is guilty of complicity in those kinds of murders because our government always seems to back anyone who is simply anti-communist. That's an arguable position. It's been argued many times, but this movie argues it awkwardly and with many, many embarrassing scenes that belong maybe in a comedy, but not in a political tract. Here, the film's central figure, a freelance photographer played by James Wood, delivers the movie's message to U.S. officials.
And you've been lying, saying that this war can be won militarily, which it can't.
Of course it can.
Oh.
Hey, now calm down, Boyle. I'm sorry, darling. Yeah, I'm not going to listen to this wino journalist left-wing commie crap, Jack. Now, we know where this guy's sympathies lie. I don't even see why we're talking to him.
Look, Richard, right. You saw Marty. Now, we know they're starting some kind of an offensive.
Hey, I'm not a spy for you guys. Left-wing colonel? Well, maybe. But I'm not a communist. And you guys never, ever seem to be able to tell the difference.
Is that a fact?
Yeah.
The body count runs high in the film as James Woods and his photographer friend John Savage trail the death squads. Savage is desperately concerned with getting risky close-up photographs.
Oh, mother.
Well, did the music tip you off as to what was going to happen? I think it sure did. That scene doesn't make much sense because if you think about it, all he got was a shot of a plane. It could be anywhere, anybody's plane. And there's a lot I don't like about Salvador, a lot more. The film celebrates photographers and takes easy pot shots at TV correspondents. The film equates the U.S. Border Patrol with right-wing death squads at the end in a wild finale. And the film includes a totally unnecessary character, a doped-up disc jockey played by Jim Belushi, who runs around either acting like a drunken fool or a scared fool. Of course, Salvador means well, but it just isn't executed well.
See, I think you missed the entire point of the movie by even starting out to talk about it as a political film. You almost make it sound like Latino or one of those films like this. This is not a political film per se. It has a lot of politics in it, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a movie about these 2 guys, Belushi and Woods, who go down to South America, and their story. It's a story of human people, of people who go into this, plunge into this situation. It's total chaos. They're irresponsible, immature, drugged half of the time. They don't know what they're doing. Nobody around them knows what they're doing.
So does that make it a good movie?
Yes, it does. It makes it a very interesting movie of these characters and what they go through.
Gee, Roger, I tell you, there is so much politics here and so much newsreel footage. I mean, the director is giving us cues all the way. Even the opening credits are using in newsreel fashion. I think that
the opening credits are newsreel fashion. The opening credits are a newsreel style of a scene that stays later in the movie. The remarkable thing about this movie is that it doesn't have any newsreel footage in it. The entire movie was staged in a very, very effective way.
No, I say newsreel style. In other words, I'm telling you that this movie is loaded with politics. That speech we heard.
What's wrong with a movie that's loaded with politics?
Nothing. Under Fire is great, and The Killing Fields is great, and The Year of Living Dangerously is great.
This
one isn't.
This movie isn't great, but it's good. It's got a lot of politics in it. It's got some interesting characters in it. They all.
I thought the Belushi character belonged maybe on Saturday Night Live, but not in this movie.
I have a feeling that people like that are just the kinds of people who would get into a car and drive to Salvador because that's where the action is.
No way.
Sometimes a movie will come along that's got some really great stuff in it, but maybe the whole movie doesn't quite work or people aren't interested in the subject, and so the good stuff gets lost in the shuffle. Salvador was a movie like that with a great performance by James Woods as a spaced-out, burnt-out journalist wandering around South America pretending to be a foreign correspondent. The movie's out on video this week, and here's a scene with Woods and John Savage, who plays a combat photographer.
You know what made photographers like Robert Capa great, rich? They weren't after the money. They captured the nobility of human suffering.
It was a great shot in Spain. One flying through the air.
Yeah, but it was more than the bodies, Richie. He got why they died.
Salvador is an angry film which suggests that while everyone solemnly debates Latin American politics, people are being shot and killed for reasons that have less to do with ideals than with craziness and greed. We did a program not long ago naming James Woods as one of the best and most underrated American actors, and this movie really shows why.
I think he's very good in the film. The rest of the story didn't hold my attention. I thought it was a little bit overwrought. Jim Belushi, I thought, went over the top, and John Savage, too, and I can't recommend the film.
The fifth Best Picture nominee this year is Traffic, and if you like that one, you might find points of comparison with Salvador, a terrific film made by Oliver Stone in 1986. This one also takes place partly in Latin America. It's also about drugs. It also involves unpleasant secrets about cooperation between American authorities and local lawbreakers.
Take this, beat Don Man cool, all right?
James Woods and James Belushi co-star in Salvador. Woods was once a journalist, but is now basically a druggie looking to make some money and get his girlfriend out of the country. And Belushi is a fired DJ who came along for what he mistakenly thought was going to be a good time. Salvador resembles Traffic in the way it implies that drugs are such big business that the people who fight them are surrounded by temptation and corruption.
I'm glad you mentioned that film. I haven't seen it since it came out, but I remember loving it. James Belushi, his best role in this film.
Our next film, 8 Million Ways to Die, it seems to be a picture inspired by the hit TV series Miami Vice and maybe the financially successful drug bust thriller Scarface. But all that this movie really is a cop and a drug dealer standing toe-to-toe and screaming at each other in a way that glamorizes the sleazy drug traffic. Jeff Bridges, normally one of our finest actors, plays a cop kicked off the sheriff's force after using too much violence. But he's drawn back into the police business after falling for a friend of that drug dealer, a hooker who the dealer has murdered. Now here, later, Bridges tries to warn her friend, another hooker, at a party thrown by the dealer.
Sada!
What's going on, baby? Look, before you open your mouth, you're gonna be talking to Sonny's killer. It was Maldonado. What the are you talking about? She was gonna talk. Even if you don't believe me, you gotta believe he's capable of doing it. Now answer him. Go on, answer.
Give me a break, Angel. I've been working all night. We'll be back in a while.
That was Andy Garcia as the dealer with the ponytail and Rosanna Arquette as the blonde hooker. Her relationship with Bridges, which should be a strong part of this film, isn't very real or isn't very explored very much. And that's a shame because Arquette and Bridges can really be compelling on film, especially when you compare this film with something really exciting like Jeff Bridges combating another drug dealer and another dealer's girlfriend in his film Against All Odds. When you look at those two films together, 8 Million Ways to Die and Against All Odds, you see that 8 Million Ways to Die is mostly flash and trash, and I repeat, a lot of toe-to-toe screaming between Bridges and the Dope King to the point that you almost want to laugh at them. It has a great shootout at the end, but that's it. As a film, it's a loser.
I'm in agreement with everything you said, and there's another aspect I'd like to get into. In the film, Jeff Bridges is portrayed as a recovering alcoholic. At the beginning of the movie, he goes to an AA meeting, then he has a relapse, then he makes his comeback, and at the end of the movie, he's giving a speech at yet another AA meeting.
Right.
Now, it seemed to me that either they should have dealt with this subject or they should have left it out of the movie altogether because it's so uneasily and awkwardly introduced that it always seems to be totally out of left field. It has nothing really to do with his character except in the scenes where he's doing it.
And you know what I thought they were doing?
What?
Because you know this film glamorizes the drug trade.
That's right.
The drug trade is not this glamorous. It's very, very rough,
That's
okay?
Right.
And you know, and you probably laughed at all the toe-to-toe screaming. So you know what I thought they did? They wanted to have their cake and eat it, too. They wanted to have all this glamorization of the drug trade, and then, to protect themselves, bring in the AA meetings, use the honorable organization AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and use it to justify this other stuff, because the stuff has, AA meetings have nothing to do with this picture. This is Scarface badly done.
I thought it would have been fascinating if they had really made a movie about a guy who's trying to battle with his own problems, battle with these other guys, but not arbitrarily, not gratuitously. One of the key claims of Platoon is that this is the first movie to tell the story of the War of Vietnam from ground level, from the point of view of the average infantryman. The movie was written and directed by Oliver Stone, who dropped out of college in the 1960s to enlist in the Army and who volunteered for combat duty in Vietnam. And Stone based the movie on his own experiences. His character in the film is played by Charlie Sheen. And before he's been in Vietnam for a week, he's already having second thoughts, which he expresses in a letter home.
It's scary because nobody tells me how to do anything because I'm new. Nobody cares about the new guys. They don't even want to know your name. The unwritten rule is a new guy's life isn't worth as much because he hasn't put his time in yet. And they say if you're going to get killed in the Nam, it's better to get it in the first few weeks. The logic being, you don't suffer that much. If you're lucky, you get to stay in the perimeter at night. And then you pull a 3-hour guard shift. So maybe you sleep 3-4 hours a night, but you don't really sleep.
Early in his tour of duty, he's on watch one night when the enemy approaches and he freezes. In a moment comes his baptism by fire, and before long the kid is accepted as one of the platoon. That includes membership in a bunker devoted entirely to drugs.
It's in the wind, troop.
The movie has extraordinary combat footage so raw and crazy and powerful that it makes earlier Vietnam battle scenes look choreographed. And in this movie, you can't predict who's going to get killed and who is going to live, because just like in real war, it's as if those choices were not left to the scriptwriters. The movie gives us two powerful characters to represent opposing attitudes toward the war. There's the hard-boiled professional soldier, played by Tom Berenger, whose face is a mask of scar tissue. And there's the pot-smoking fatalist who defies authority. He's played by Willem Dafoe. Two great performances. The kid is caught between those two strong authority figures, and his war will be a question of which one he finally chooses. Platoon is a great movie, a powerful movie, and one of the year's best.
Oh, I think it is too, Roger, and I'm so delighted that having gone through the era of, the wonderful era of Coming Home, Apocalypse Now, and the Deer Hunter, films that really were about the war, and then about 6 or 7 years later, we get this whole revisionist Rambo fantasy war is fun thing. Now we come back. The pendulum is swinging back now, and we are getting back to what that war was about, a war that is so important in so many ways to this country. And, you know, there's this memorial that was finally built. Well, this is its own kind of memorial, this film, because this film is what it's about. And I think that much is important.
I think this is Oliver Stone's own memorial. We know that he went to Vietnam and that he saw what went on there. When he came back, he's a screenwriter who wrote movies like Midnight Express and Scarface. He waited a long time to do his Vietnam story because I think it took him a long time to simplify it, to get it down to what it really meant to him, and not just to be caught up in all of the symbols of the war and all of the controversy of that war, his own experience.
Well, I want to take you into one of my favorite scenes of the Platoon film, and that involves a line of narration with Charlie Sheen writing to his grandmother, a quote that I can't forget. And the quote is, "Hell is a place where there is no reason." And the whole movie, I think, suggests that Vietnam was such a hell. And the scene that captures that as well as any in the picture is the scene where the troops begin to let out their rage against some of the Vietnamese and threaten to kill their children. The soldiers also tear into each other.
Burn! Burn!
Stay out of this, Elias. This ain't your show. You ain't a firing squad, you piece of...
That's powerful stuff, and those of us back home who read about the infamous My Lai incident of American soldiers killing innocent women and children, I think we all read those news reports and at first thought, how could they? Well, this doesn't excuse anyone's conduct, but that scene in Platoon that we just saw and others like it helped me to understand how such a thing could happen in wartime. We don't approve it, I have to underline that, but we now understand it, and rare is the film that brings such understanding of horrible things.
The other thing that the film does, I think, is bring an understanding of the daily conditions under which those soldiers lived. And Stone took his soldiers out in the Philippines, where this movie was shot, and put them through basic training for weeks before they made this film. They were eating sea rations, they were up all night, they were marching around, to the point where when the movie started shooting, they were in a state of utter and total exhaustion. And you can see that. These are not actors giving nice, neat performances. These are people who are strung out to the last ounce of courage and endurance that they have, and that comes through on the screen, the pressure that they were under.
Neither one of us served in Vietnam, and as I know, I sat there, I thought, boy, we don't know what we're talking about unless we were there, I'm afraid. That's the power of this film.
My choice for the best film of 1986 is one that came out at the very end of the year, and it's called Platoon. It was written and directed by Oliver Stone, who served for 18 months in Vietnam and who wanted to make a movie from the viewpoint of the ordinary foot soldier, the combat infantryman. This is Charlie Sheen as the film's hero, arriving in Vietnam and passing a long line of body bags and the ominous, empty eyes of the survivors.
Oh, man. Is that what I think it is? Welcome to the Nile. Follow me. You're gonna love the Nile. 65 and a wake-up. Oh, Lord.
And that's just the opening scene of the film. Later in the movie, Sheen will be thrust into the very heart of combat, into confused and disorganized battle scenes that are all the more convincing because they're not choreographed like most war movies. The bullets seem to be coming from everywhere. The enemy seems to be anywhere or nowhere. And under the pressure of fear and fatigue, the men of that platoon fight not only the enemy, but also each other. Platoon is the year's best film for two reasons: because it makes a serious statement about a serious subject, and because it does it so well.
It does it very well, and I think what it does that's different than any other war film that I've seen is most war films, you get the sense we move in a wave.
Yeah.
The commander says charge and all this. And in this film, and what this guy is saying about Vietnam is basically it was scattered. You had someone on your left, someone on your right, maybe.
Yeah.
And you didn't know anything else. It was a man just dumped in a garden, a destroyed, defoiled garden, and could he make it? And we were all alone, the people there.
And so you see the enormous pressure that builds up, because there was no feeling that those are the lines over there, and now we're in danger, and now we're safe.
Yeah.
We're never safe. We may not be in danger. They just walk around in a way, around and around this area, going to villages, countering the enemy, then nothing happens, then something happens. It's the unpredictability that begins to get to them.
And also, I must say, the My Lai massacre, which shocked us all, we said, how could it happen? This film says it's plausible, given that kind of crazed mentality that people were put in.
It's a very, very, very strong...
Superb film, and it's on my list. Wall Street is the eagerly awaited new film by Oliver Stone, the creator of last year's Oscar-winning film Platoon. Wall Street, however, is not in the same league with that great film, partially because we all know, thanks to the recent stock market collapse, a little bit about Wall Street, more than we knew about the reality of Vietnam. Also, the story of Wall Street is rather predictable. Charlie Sheen stars as a young stockbroker from a working-class family who is trying to strike it rich by landing as one of his clients a slimy, coarse, multimillionaire wheeler-dealer named Gordon Gekko, a lizard name, played by Michael Douglas.
I've been in this business since '69. Most of these Harvard MBA types, they don't add up to dog. You need guys that are poor, smart, and hungry, and no feelings. You win a few, you lose a few, but you keep on fighting. And if you need a friend, get a dog.
He's one tough trader, and Gekko trades illegally on inside information. And soon, Charlie Sheen is making a bundle with him, asking a friend to join the game of spilling corporate secrets.
I hear you guys are handling the Fairchild Foods merger, and it may not be going through. Any surprises I haven't read about in the Wall Street Journal?
Come on, buddy, that's illegal. You wouldn't want to get me disbarred now, would you?
Oh, who's listening? Just one college buddy talking to another.
Yeah, right.
That's James Spader, so good as the lawyer. Michael Douglas overplays his role, I think, most of the time, except here, where he delivers a fascinating speech to shareholders of a company he's trying to take over.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
He could run for office talking like that. The major personal conflict in the film is a hokey family affair when Gecko threatens to take over the airline that employs Charlie Sheen's father, played by Sheen's real father, Martin Sheen.
I know what this guy's all about. Greed. He don't give a damn about Blue Star or the unions. He's in and out for the buck, and he don't take prisoners.
Now, wait just a minute.
Sure. Now, what's worth doing is worth doing for money. It's a bad bargain if nobody gains. And if we do this deal, everybody gains.
Sure, he's selling the idea everybody's going to gain, but that's not his plan. And so we're left with the notion, whose side is Charlie Sheen going to take, his father's or his financial mentors? Well, Platoon had a good sergeant and a bad sergeant, but they were fresh faces in a hidden jungle. The good and evil fathers, if you will, in Wall Street are much too familiar to us, much too broadly drawn. The film, however, does work as a pulp drama, and some of the Wall Street sequences, some of the corporate language and the trading and all that is very well filmed and exciting. But as a major film, I think you can find more financial drama every day reading the Wall Street Journal.
So in other words, you don't recommend seeing the
No,
film?
actually, as a matter of fact, I do recommend seeing it. I don't think it's that good, though. And coming from a guy who directed Platoon, I was particularly disappointed. But there are some entertaining things about the film.
See, I think your entire comparison with Platoon is just based on the fact that the same man directed both films.
It's a legitimate
I think
comparison.
you could more likely compare this movie to movies like Sweet Smell of Success or The Graduate, movies that are in the same genre. And then you'll find how good this movie is, as the story of an ambitious young guy who takes the wrong mentor and is led right down the garden path. Also, I totally disagree with your criticism of Michael Douglas's performance. If there's a weak performance in the movie, it's Charlie Sheen. He's too open-faced, he's too baby-faced for us to believe that he could really sell anyone on these manipulations. But Douglas is right on. It's a terrific performance. It's avaricious, it's consuming, it's obsessive, and it's good.
Let me explain. Most of the guys that are this big of a heavy hitter, $50, $100 million man that this guy is, those guys are the quiet, cold killers.
Well, that's your notion. That's your notion. I think we have to review. We have to review the character on the screen, Gene.
That's right.
Not your theories about what these guys are really like.
No, because there's a lot of tape that exists of these people, and I'm telling you, he plays it right in that one scene when he gives a cool speech.
That's when he's out in public. Of course he could run for office. He's real slick and smooth. The thing is, you see him backstage. You see him behind the scenes.
Overacting.
Yeah, not overacting.
No,
not at all.
That's my call.
No, well, I think you're way off base.
Talk radio, the story of a repellent but mesmerizing young man who hosts a late-night talk radio show in Dallas, insulting and challenging his guests. Eric Bogosian, who co-wrote this story and performed it first on stage in New York, is perversely compelling as talk show host Barry Champlain, who gets nutty calls and venomous mail.
Now, all different kinds of people live here. Foreigners, people with accents. Are they clean? Are they sanitary?
Why don't you ask one of them?
Well, sure, that would be a nice idea to just go to somebody's house and knock on their door. But what if a serial murderer lived there? What if Ted Bundy lived there? What if he was just sitting inside watching television, eating potato chips, and I came to the door? Why, you just come right on in here, Denise, he'd say.
Barry is also confrontational with his boss, Alec Baldwin, who wants to tone down Barry and make his show a national talk fest.
What do you think you're doing in here? Changing the world? This is a talk show, Barry, and you are a talk show host. Alan does the drive time, Jerry does the home handyman stuff, Sheila does the shrink stuff, Sid does the financial stuff, and you hang up on people. That's your job.
Talk radio also takes us inside Barry's life away from the microphone. He's not much happier away from the show, talking with his ex-wife, played by Ellen Greene. He still loves her.
Barry, what do you want me to do? You want me to just fall in love with you again? Is that what this is about?
I don't want you to do anything. I mean, you're here. That's all I'm happy that you're here.
I don't know what, Barry. I have to go at the end of the day or tomorrow, and I can't keep coming back and forth.
I like watching movies about tough characters like Barry Champlain. He's cut from the same angry mold as Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. He has his private demons. He wants to do the right thing, but he often acts hostily. It's just one life, but this character in this film seems so much more real than most of the would-be characters I see on the screen. Talk Radio was made by Platoon director Oliver Stone, and he continues his record of making tough, thoughtful films.
I liked it too. I thought it was really claustrophobic in the way it locks us in that studio that has those windows that look out on the high rises of the city. So there were times, for example, when that caller says, "You're looking at that box right now, I know you are," and you think he's looking at this guy through a sniper scope. I mean, it was really dramatic. And the entire undercurrent of the movie is chilling because this guy is almost reaching out for trouble. He's almost egging on his listeners.
At the same time, the listeners are fascinating because it's sort of all the lonely people, or at least all the hateful people, both categories call in, and so you get this feeling of this just basic unrest and bile backing up in the throat of America, and it's fascinating in that regard. I've talked to a lot of people who've seen the film and have not liked it because they couldn't like this character. I don't think you're supposed to like Barry Champlain. I think you're just supposed to be interested in a guy who is saying what's on his mind, is totally screwed up emotionally, but has a kernel of truth to what he's saying.
As a general rule, I wonder if you'd agree with this.
I know what you're going to say.
It's more likely that a movie is going to be boring if it's about characters you like.
You're supposed to like.
You're supposed to like than if it's about characters that you're not supposed to like.
I agree.
Our next movie is Born on the 4th of July, and this is an amazingly powerful and important film built on a performance by Tom Cruise that is far beyond anything this talented young actor has done earlier in his career. It's a brave performance about a brave man, a Vietnam veteran named Ron Kovic, whose autobiography inspired the film. As the movie opens, Kovic, played by Cruise, is a typical teenager in a typical small American town, and he's proud that he has volunteered to be a Marine.
I'm going to boot camp soon. I joined the Marines 4 years, so I go to Vietnam. They say I'll probably go right on the front line.
Really? Wow.
I see a lot of action.
He considers it his patriotic duty to fight in Vietnam, and one day, like thousands of other young Americans, he's seriously injured in battle. The news from the doctors is grim for the young man, who's told he's paralyzed from the chest down.
Will I ever be able to have children?
No. No, but we have a very good psychologist here. He's helping.
Oh, I'll walk again.
No,
I know
Let
I'll
me
walk
tell you
again.
something, Ron. You will never walk again.
Back home, Kovic still defends the war, especially against his anti-war younger brother.
Want to bring down this country? Love it or leave it, Tommy. You know, you could just love it or leave it.
It's only after he starts sharing memories with other Vietnam veterans that the futility of the war starts to come into focus for him.
I think, Timmy, I give everything I believe in, everything I got, all my values, just to have my body back again, just to be whole again.
Kovic makes a complete about-face from a Marine volunteer to an angry anti-war protester who was thrown out of the 1972 Republican National Convention. Born on the 4th of July is based on the life of one Vietnam veteran, and it was directed by another one, Oliver Stone, who told his own story in the Academy Award-winning movie Platoon. This movie is like the second half of that story, telling of an America that was bitterly divided over the war, and of one American soldier who reflects that division and bitterness. In scene after scene in this movie, Tom Cruise grows and reaches further than he's ever done before, especially in a scene where his character protests against the shabby medical treatment he receives in a military hospital, or also when he returns home and starts drinking too much, or also in a heartbreaking search for escape in a Mexican brothel. By the end of this movie, I felt as if I had relived an important part of that most important chapter in the recent American past, and I knew I'd seen one of the best movies of the year.
I think it is clearly that, and it's one of the great performances in recent years. I want to focus on the one thing that you mentioned, which was the hospital sequences, because when I think of the greatness of this picture, it really isn't because of Tom Cruise disappearing into character, which he does and does very well, and so you can't see the good-looking, grinning face anymore. That's a terrific achievement. But what's especially good and courageous is, I think, Oliver Stone showing what the veterans have to go through if they have been seriously wounded and crippled. And so we see scenes that are not going to be box office, that are going to turn people off, but are going to make a memorable film. And that is, I'm talking about what they have to do if you're crippled with your bodily functions. And you see these guys and how they have to clean themselves or remain unclean for long periods of time. You see the damage that a bullet can really do. That's the untold story of all violence in movies. What's the after effect of actually getting hit? And so you see how this guy pays, and pays every day, every hour.
That's the reality. If you get hit like this, you're in that chair for life, and the anger and frustration and hurt that he feels when that happens to him saturates this movie and makes it so powerful.
Yeah, and Kovic isn't always perfect.
No.
He's out of control at times. You refer to the alcoholism. It's very clear there. The escape into drugs. It's all there. And that's what I'll always remember about this picture. I read one place where, under his contract, Oliver Stone could only go 2 hours and 15 minutes in this film. He went 10 minutes more. They could have clipped some of the sequences we're talking about. Not the falling down, but the hospital stuff. I'm glad it's there.
It's a great film. It's a great performance.
Continuing our countdown of the best films of 1989, my number 5 choice is Oliver Stone's Born on the 4th of July, an angry, sweeping epic story of one man's battle for and then against the United States involvement in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The soldier in turmoil is gung-ho Marine Ron Kovic, played by Tom Cruise, initially as a rah-rah all-American boy.
I'm going to boot camp soon. I joined the Marines 4 years, so I go to Vietnam. They say I'll probably go right on the front line.
Kovic is wounded in combat, and director Stone's portrayal of the combat scenes that end up crippling Kovic are just as compelling as the ones he used in his last Vietnam movie, Platoon. It's what happens when Kovic comes home, confined to a wheelchair, that is the centerpiece of this film. He feels betrayed and leads a protest against the war and his government. Tom Cruise is wonderful, encompassing nearly 20 years of a man's life, but what also makes this film worthy of top 10 status are brief scenes in a military hospital in which we see the routine degradation that a crippled soldier must endure merely with his bodily functions. We so rarely see the true effects of a bullet wound in a movie. Born on the 4th of July smacks us in the face with that reality.
It sure does, and it also smacks us in the face with the reality of what this country went through during that war, as encapsulated in the life of this man, Ron Kovic, who volunteered for the Marines, thought it was his duty to go over there, didn't care, so he said, if I give my life for my country. And after what happened to him and he came back, went through an entire about-face in his opinions about the war. It's a good film. I have it a little higher on my list. It's number 4 on my list.
Okay, well, you know what?
What does that mean,
yeah,
you know?
Well, you know what I want
4 versus 5.
Yeah, the thing that is important for me is that this film doesn't hedge its argument. It doesn't try to be balanced.
Yeah.
It's saying it was wrong and that's it, and here's the guy that paid the price.
That's one of the things I like about Oliver Stone, is that Oliver Stone never leaves any doubt as to exactly where he stands in these films. It was with Born on the 4th of July in 1989 that Tom Cruise proved for once and all that he has what it takes to handle a major dramatic role. This time, in a sense, his co-star was the director, Oliver Stone, who had been trying to make the story of Ron Kovic's life for nearly 10 years. Audiences accustomed to Cruise's clean-cut good looks had a surprise in store when they saw him as the victim of an indifferent military medical establishment.
It can be done. It can be done. Right there. Keep it going, buddy. Keep it going. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Ah! Ah! Willie, think I need... Oh! Oh!
There was a moment in Born on the 4th of July when the character changes his mind. He's always been a patriot, believing in his country, right or wrong, but sitting in the backyard with a friend who was also in the war, he realizes that this time his country was wrong. Born on the 4th of July was one of the best and most powerful movies of 1989, and Tom Cruise was perhaps the perfect actor for it. Other actors could have played the scenes where the character descends into hell when he's wounded and paralyzed and neglected and thrown back into an indifferent civilian society. But curiously enough, those scenes might not have worked without the early scenes setting up the Ron Kovic character as an average, all-American boy, a kid who wanted to join the Marines. Tom Cruise was completely convincing as that young volunteer, and so his change and disillusionment became all the more convincing. Jim Morrison and the Doors left behind some classic rock and roll recordings, which I still love to listen to, but on the basis of the Doors, an ambitious new movie by Oliver Stone, the pleasure I get in listening to those songs is nothing compared to the pain that went into their making. The movie was shot in widescreen, and that's the way Stone wants you to see it here in these clips very effectively. It documents the brief life of Morrison and the Doors from their first appearance on the Los Angeles rock scene to their superstardom, and then all of the bad vibes as Morrison turned into a heavy-duty drunk and drug abuser. Toward the end, every concert was a cliffhanger. Would Jim be able to get it together, or would he self-destruct?
And he said, well, you better get out of there, or what? I said. and he started pushing me. Yeah, so I started pushing back.
In the beginning, it wasn't like that, as Morrison, a dreamy Venice Beach hippie, first talked about forming a band with Ray Manzarek, a keyboard player, portrayed here by Kyle MacLachlan.
Sides are being chosen. Everything's gonna flame, man. The planet is screaming for change, Morrison. We gotta make the mix.
Oliver Stone came of age in this world, and his movie does a brilliant job of recreating it in relationships like this one between Morrison and his companion Pam, played by Meg Ryan. Here you can see how Morrison's drugs have made all of his relationships problematical.
Ooh, it's just some low-grade acid. It's not heavy.
Oh, Jim. Oh, God. You know, I cooked the stuff.
Oh, baby,
and
it's okay.
people are coming, you know?
It's amazing the way the movie recreates the Doors' concert scenes. They look like outtakes from a documentary that was shot at the time. The crowd scenes there have an amazing impact, and this is one of the most realistic-looking rock movies ever made. But sitting through the decline and fall of Jim Morrison is not a pleasant experience, and the last hour of The Doors is like spending several weeks trapped inside the party from hell. Drugs turned Morrison into a narcissistic, selfish, deceptive monster whose ego made life miserable for everyone around him. That creates a paradox. This is a brilliant movie about a person I would rather not have met. I have great admiration for many of the elements in the film, including Val Kilmer's heroic performance as Jim Morrison. He looks so much like Morrison that it's eerie, but he's also completely convincing in the role. I also like Kathleen Quinlan's work as a weird rock journalist who feeds Morrison's fantasies. And Oliver Stone's achievement in recreating this period of time, including the rock concerts, is astonishing. The Doors is a very well-made movie about some terrific music, but the misery of its hero makes it truly painful to watch.
You know, I didn't suffer that much, except in his relationship with the Pamela Corson character played by Meg Ryan, which I thought was, I guess, so unhappy that it wasn't really worth watching. But the rest of the picture is a musical experience, which is really what I think I took out of it. It was a pleasure to revisit the times. I felt like I was given a ticket back to the 60s, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being there, watching the music, seeing it created, seeing the spirit of the 60s recreated, the positive spirit of people taking chances. I thought I really thought it was a terrific film.
You've just given a wonderful review of the first 20 minutes of the film. What about what Jim Morrison goes through in this movie? His obsession with death, his completely sadistic and uncaring treatment of everyone around him, the way that they start reacting to him with passive-aggressive hatefulness, so that the passive-aggressive hate, so that the people in the band in the background who are playing while he's singing look at him as if they would like to kill him. What about the audiences he kept waiting for hours? What about the painful spectacle of him embarrassing himself in public while drunk and exposing himself? Is that the spirit of the 60s?
I don't think, well, you know what? People did awful things, sure. They were drug-influenced and drunk.
But what about this guy? He was more than drug-influenced. He was on a complete death trip.
Well, okay, I saw that, but I enjoyed the music that was created during that period.
Well, then you should get the soundtrack album.
I did actually buy 2 records from the film. I enjoyed the film thoroughly. I'm not exactly sure what we're arguing about here. We both liked the movie. I think
I didn't. I'm not going to give it thumbs up. No.
You call his performance brilliant?
Yes.
And the recreation of the rock music brilliant? And you're not going to recommend that people see this?
I think it's a pretty unpleasant experience.
But you wouldn't want them to see the brilliant things in the film?
Listen to the music. I admired a lot of the things in this movie, but the problem is, by the end of the film, it's really a downer. I mean, in a bad way.
But wait a second. There are people. It's documented the guy died at the age of 27.
That's right.
Okay, so obviously he told the story straight. Is the story's unhappy straight? We've been arguing for years that we want pictures not to be...
It goes on and on, Gene. It goes on and on and on. After a while, you just want to cover your eyes. You just don't want to see this guy destroying himself and those around him any longer. It's too painful. If you have any empathy at all, you want to draw a cloak of mercy over this scene.
Well, actually, it sounds like you got deeply, deeply involved in the picture, as did I.
Well, more deeply than you, apparently. You like the music.
Oh, I like the music, and I cared about the performance. Val Kilmer was great. I want to make one more point on Val Kilmer's performance. It's very likely that Jeremy Irons will win as Best Actor for Reversal of Fortune, playing the real Klaus von Bülow. This is an even better piece of work, because not only is he playing a real character, and convincingly, he's singing like him. It's an amazing achievement.
Yeah, they have seamless tracks in which you hear Jim Morrison and you hear Val Kilmer and you don't know who you're listening to. You know, when I'm reviewing this movie, I'm kind of caught in the straitjacket of this ridiculous thumbs up, thumbs down business, because I can't recommend the experience. It was just too painful. Yet at the same time, I do, and that's the kind of issue that you were confused by. I do admire what Jim Morrison did. I admire a lot of what Oliver Stone did. What they have not created is a film that was very pleasant to sit through.
But Roger, I mean, you're doing the very thing that you have knocked the audience for, which is wanting sweet times.
Don't want it. Don't want it.
Come on, Roger. This is hard. The fact that I mean, I'm sitting there. Oliver Stone's probably watching, saying, "I got Ebert." That's exactly the reaction I wanted.
We had a totally different reaction because in everything you've said in your entire review, you apparently had a good time. You enjoyed the music. You didn't. I don't think you really connected.
Felt the pain?
You didn't. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Not the way
I don't think you really felt the pain the way I did of what this guy is going through. It's almost like if you're visiting a sick ward, you're glad the doctors are doing a great job. You don't necessarily want to spend 2.5 hours there watching people die.
But wait a second. You like the picture Awakenings, right? It's about people who are sick. I mean, what's the problem with showing someone who's sick?
That's a rhetorical argument.
No, it's a good argument. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about the Doors movie for the rest of the year because, boy, the experience you had, I wouldn't want to keep people from seeing that at all. The release of The Doors gives me one more chance to recommend Oliver Stone's film about the 60s musical group and its magnetic leader, Jim Morrison. Val Kilmer gives a mesmerizing performance as Morrison, who viewed himself as infused with an Indian spirit as he led a tribal rebellion against complacency in the Vietnam-era America. Val Kilmer couldn't have been better. I sure hope he is remembered at Oscar time next year. The evocation of the 60s by Oliver Stone is on target, warts and all. You know, I think sometimes people stay away from a picture like this in theaters because they're afraid they're going to have to deal with the rowdy rock music crowd. Well, The Doors is available now on tape and disc, and you don't need a metal detector in your own home to watch it, which I strongly recommend you do. My bottom line on JFK is that it is full of questionable material, but also full of undeniably compelling entertainment. As director Oliver Stone sees it, the Kennedy assassination was a coup d'etat of mammoth proportion involving everyone from the CIA to LBJ to munition manufacturers to the media. Leading the crusade for truth is Stone's idealized portrait of New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner, in another one of his latter-day Jimmy Stewart roles, here talking to his staff.
We're talking about our government here.
No, we're talking about a crime, Bill, pure and simple. Y'all got to start thinking on a different level, like the CIA does. Now, we're through the looking glass here, people. White is black, and black is white. Just maybe Oswald is exactly what he said he was. A patsy.
What is remarkable in the film is Stone's recreation of time and place. Here, as Garrison and his investigator speculate at the Texas Book Depository window about Lee Harvey Oswald's marksmanship ability.
The FBI tried 2 sets of tests. Not one of their sharpshooters could match Oswald's performance. Not one. And Oswald was at best a medium shot.
If not Oswald, who was responsible? Well, one of Garrison's investigators says the crime is a mafia hit. Garrison disagrees.
Could the mob get the FBI, the CIA, and the Dallas police to make a mess of the investigation? I mean, could the mob get the Warren Commission appointed to cover it up? Could the mob wreck the autopsy? I mean, could the mob influence the national media to go to sleep?
On a strictly movie level, JFK is full of fantastic characters and performances, most notably Joe Pesci as a New Orleans lowlife who may have been involved, but only, he says, as a stooge, like a lot of others, including Jack Ruby, who, of course, killed Oswald.
And who killed the president?
Oh, man, why don't you stop it? This is too big for you. You know that? This is who did the president? Who killed Kennedy? Man, it's a mystery. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma. The shooters don't even know. Don't you get it?
JFK is full of exceptional sequences of filmmaking. It made other films I saw the same day, and I saw one before and one after. They seemed very small indeed. I think Oliver Stone has a right to interpret history any way he wants, history that is especially disputed. I think he might have served his film a little bit better by labeling his Jim Garrison character as Jim somebody else. That one change might have shown that he was aware of exactly what he was doing. And some of the speechifying at the end of the picture is too purple for my taste, but on balance, I admire this film, Oliver Stone's nerve, and I can't understand why anyone would want to miss it or miss the opportunity to debate it.
To debate it and to come out and to talk with a great deal of exuberance and controversy about what's in it. I found this film exhilarating.
Me too.
And you know, I've read a lot of attacks on it. They've been attacking it now for months. One of the News Weekly said, well, he'll confuse people because he shows you scenes that aren't real and makes you think they are. And they cited as an example the scene where a cop takes a palm print on the rifle off of the hand of Oswald's corpse. Now, how many people in the theater are going to think that a real cop would pose for the motion picture cameras while he's falsifying evidence? I don't think so. I think intelligent moviegoers are capable of looking at this movie and knowing exactly what Stone did. He took real footage, he took fictional footage, and a lot of it is speculative. In other words, Garrison's imagining different ways the same things could have happened, and it's exhilarating for us to follow that thought process through to the end, even if at the end we still don't know who killed Kennedy.
I think that what he is saying, really, I think that included in the conspiracy is the American public, in the sense of not demanding more. And here's a guy who feels, hey, look, I went to Vietnam. I have reason to believe that the whole Vietnam experience was caused or could have been averted if Kennedy had lived. Not sure, but could have been. Maybe a better chance than with LBJ running the ship. And therefore, I laid my life on it. I have the right to make a film about it, too. So on the right basis, I don't think that should be disputed at all. And it's very entertaining. And you know what's going to happen? I think that a lot of the great performances in this picture are going to get swallowed up in controversy, and they won't realize they're really performances, and they won't get nominated, and they should be.
They seem too real. But, you know, a lot of the stuff that is real in this film is fascinating, too, and especially his use of the Zapruder film, the man who made the home movie of the assassination. And you look at this movie, and you find it hard to believe that one of the bullets didn't come from the front.
At the same time, Roger, it's worth discussing because I have been reading a lot about this over the 20-some
that
years.
it's a nervous twitch theory.
No, there's more than there's a nervous twitch. There's something about exiting propulsion and stuff. But let's talk about it.
But you're right about one thing. Well, we're both right about one thing. It's a terrific movie. It really is a terrific movie-going experience. The #1 film on my list is the single film that moved me the most this year and made me think the most, and that is JFK by Oliver Stone. This was a conspiracy theory movie with a vengeance, a film that speculated that the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy may have involved almost everyone on the map, from the FBI and the CIA to the Cubans and the Mafia, and Stone uses former New Orleans DA Jim Garrison, fictionalized, as the central character of his story, is played here by Kevin Costner. He's a man obsessed with the need to find an elusive truth. I've read a lot of the criticisms of JFK, the movie, and I agree with many of them. Garrison was apparently something of a loose cannon. By making him his hero, Oliver Stone is papering over some weak spots in Garrison's life and career, and in his case. But JFK does not pretend to answer the question of who killed Kennedy. Instead, it basically wants to reopen the case and to show why Lee Harvey Oswald probably could not have been acting all by himself, why there's a lot of evidence pointing to a conspiracy. This is the kind of movie that makes you think, and at the same time it's riveting entertainment, and it also deserves my '1 position because of Oliver Stone's sheer filmmaking skill in bringing together documentary and fictional footage, black and white and color, 8mm, 16mm, 35mm, all into a fascinating montage of history.
And he did it rather quickly. I mean, this film didn't get started until the spring. I'm impressed with what's up there on the screen. I think that he makes it pretty clear. This picture ranked on my top 10 list. I think it's number 6 or 7. And why I liked it is that I think he makes it pretty clear that he isn't offering a definitive answer, because he throws in everything. In fact, I think if you asked him point blank, he'd have to say that all the possibilities that he raises couldn't possibly be true. Everybody's implicated in this thing.
Well, there are contradictory theories in the movie that can't both be true.
So therefore,
anyway.
I think he should be cut a little slack, and I think that he is raising questions that a lot of people have had. He could have titled the Garrison character differently. I think that would have helped him and showed a little self-awareness of what he was trying to do. But in terms of riveting, well, what drama have we lived through that could be more riveting?
No movie in recent history has been attacked more violently than JFK, and although you may have heard some of Oliver Stone's responses to the charges, you may not have heard from Kevin Costner. We asked him how it felt to be caught in the crossfire.
Assassins need payrolls, schedules, times, orders. This was a military-style ambush from start to finish. This was a coup d'etat with Lyndon Johnson waiting in the wings.
There you have Kevin Costner delivering one of the many controversial theories that have made JFK the target of more criticism than any other American film in years. And along with Oliver Stone, who wrote and directed the movie, Costner has watched the film draw crowds despite a constant attack from journalists who don't like the movie's interpretation of history. Recently, I talked to Costner about the constant critical fire aimed at this movie and the people who made it. Were you surprised that this movie involves so much controversy and so many attacks?
I was. I was, because when I think of what could really be attacked in this country, it seems like we should be attacking homeless. I don't want to get on a political thing, but when I see a concentrated effort on one guy who somehow we're afraid of, that really makes me wonder what is the what's the weight behind that? To have his script printed in the Washington Post, some of it published, that's almost like industrial espionage. I mean, I personally go to the movies once a week to my theater, and I call it industrial espionage because I don't want to know the ending of something. I don't want to know something, and I feel like you're robbing me of my $7. I don't like that. I think there's something unfair about that.
Do you feel in any way that you are a point man or that you have to take the heat for attacks on this movie? Does that impact on your career as an actor, that you're also involved in the controversy?
I don't know. I don't know the implications of that. I'm kind of glad that I don't, because otherwise you'd be afraid of your own shadow every time you made a move, how it's going to impact what it's going to be. But I do have an obligation as one of the leads in the movie to speak up for the movie, because I am answerable to what it is I do and why I do it. At least in this day and age, people want to know. So, I accept that.
Are you a political person, and has this movie disillusioned you about our government?
I guess I am political. I think we've got to think about this country in the way that we don't think. We're really not as smart as we think we are. We're not first in hardly anything anymore, except the production of movies. We're not as clever as we think we are, and I think because we're dealing with both a lot.
There were some very well-known Hollywood names who turned down this role because they just didn't want to get their careers attached to this sort of controversy, and I admire Costner, whose politics are reportedly not at all the same as Oliver Stone's, for having the nerve to take this role and to put his neck on the line and to say, okay, let's give this point of view a hearing.
He did Oliver Stone more of a favor than he did himself playing this, and I think he could probably know that going in, so I admire it too, because Oliver Stone is borrowing, really, the all-American quality that Kevin Costner has, and Costner is getting into a politically charged project that can't help him. So I admire Costner. I admire Costner for it.
You say it can't help him. In the long run, it can't help him, because the actors that we really admire are actors who are prepared to play unlikable, controversial, strange, odd, unconventional characters. Look at Jack Nicholson, for example. Look at Gene Hackman. Look at actors like this who don't always think about their image, but who put the challenge of the role ahead of their image.
History will judge him well on this. I'm just saying that within the little power brokers of Hollywood, I don't know that this necessarily helps him. I want to take one crack, because you picked it as the best film of the year. I want to take one crack at some of the letters that we've been getting. I had it on my 10 best list, too. We've been getting angry letters at us saying we're a bunch of dupes, and these are from people who haven't seen the picture, by the way. But that's okay. They're just going at our politics, our supposed politics, where I think we're really reviewing the picture. I want to say this about this movie, JFK. I don't think Oliver Stone really knows what happens. What happened then?
No.
I do not think he knows that.
You can't come out of the movie knowing what he thinks.
I think that Oliver Stone is saying this, and I wish people would understand it. I think that he's saying this, that in 1963, this country was so shell-shocked that for the last 29 years, we've been asleep. We have suffered under Watergate, Vietnam, savings and loan crises, Iran-Contra, and all this stuff, and we're not active enough. We're not active enough as citizens. That, to me, is a patriotic message. I don't understand why people can't understand that, ultimately, this is a patriotic film.
What he's saying is, no matter whether you buy my theory or not,
get involved.
Let's go back and look again at what happened and try to figure it out and not just be passive people who accept everything that's told to us.
And if we don't solve this crime, and I'm not convinced what happened either, if we don't solve this crime, but at least be participatory in our government. And that is the American ideal, and I think it's a patriotic picture.
Okay.
First film is Heaven and Earth, and this is the first time I've really been disappointed by director Oliver Stone in a long time. I think this is a very sketchy, rough work with narration that merely states emotion, substituting for his usual dramatic intensity. As we follow the fortunes, as Roger mentioned, of a young Vietnamese woman during the American War in her country.
When the soldiers came, I fought to keep my village and my family from being torn apart.
We are the soldiers of liberation! Help us win this war, and you get to keep your property and everything else you love.
Hip T. Lee plays the woman, and her suffering during the war is tragic, of course, but nothing that is surprising on the screen. Not much better is when she is befriended by an American sergeant, Tommy Lee Jones, in his most predictable work in years.
Is this your little brother?
What?
Is this handsome little boy your relative?
My son.
Oh, of course he is. He looks just like you. There's a lot of spirit around the eyes.
The film does break out of familiar territory when Jones's tour of duty is over and he and his growing family come back to an America that we get to view through a foreigner's eyes. Here's where Director Stone shines for the first time in this film.
In Da Nang, we drive past these hospitals, past people that our bombs had blown to bits, and then wave. Boys and girls with no arms, no legs, waving at us like the tourists on the way to the beach. Why? Because they're happy to be alive. They're glad to see us. And we put them where they were. And there's 20 of them, dead or mutilated, for every one of us. So don't expect Lee to do handstands over your damn turkey.
Some of those scenes are very good. I appreciate that Oliver Stone gives us the Vietnamese view of the war, a point of view not represented previously in Hollywood war films. But again, we're told how bad things are in narration and not in original scenes, save for a few of the American passages. Sorry to say, but you won't be surprised very often by Heaven and Earth.
Well, all I'm surprised by is your review. There's very little narration in this film, Gene, and there are a great many dramatic scenes that show the life of this woman as she is torn off. Well, sure, she talks to us a little bit at the beginning, but what about the dramatic scenes where she's dealing with the Viet Cong and they're dealing with her and they're assaulting her?
I guess.
And then when the American
I didn't think that those were anything that I hadn't sort of seen before.
I don't think you've seen exactly
prisoner of
anything
war
like
stuff
that
in war
before.
films.
One of the things that this movie really, I think, emphasizes is the fact that while trying to win the hearts and minds of these people, we took them off of their land, put them into so-called strategic hamlets, so that they had to leave the places that their ancestors had made sacred. And this was why we could basically never win the war. And then it shows the whole dynamic that brings her to Saigon and gets her involved in the sex industry. That isn't done with a lot of narration.
No, the stuff that you just said, bring her to Saigon with the sex industry, that, I think, viewers of Vietnamese war films certainly have heard that story.
Well, you know, there's only one war. I mean, he can't make up a new war with original stuff in it. What he's doing here is, for the first time, showing that war through the eyes of a Vietnamese woman whose life was totally disrupted by it.
The only part that surprised me, the only thing where I saw something fresh, is when she got to America.
Well, I saw a lot more than that. Okay. One of the most talked about movies of the season is sure to be Natural Born Killers, the violent and wildly satirical new film by Oliver Stone, which takes as its target the way that criminals become celebrities when their cases are sensationalized by the media. The movie stars Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis in chilling over-the-top performances as Mickey and Mallory Knox, a couple of mass murderers who go on a national killing rampage, being sure to leave their names behind so their fame will grow.
What do you have to say to your fans?
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Robert Downey Jr. plays a tabloid TV reporter who is almost insane with excitement about the ratings possibilities in his exclusive coverage of the two.
What do you think of Mickey and Mallory, huh?
They're hot.
They're hot. Totally hot.
Oh, Mickey and the Marilyn. That's so cool. That's so great.
Mickey and Mallory are the best thing to happen to mass murder since Manson.
Yeah, but they're way cooler.
Tommy Lee Jones is the warden of a prison which briefly holds Mickey and Mallory, and he, too, is intoxicated by his proximity to America's most famous killers.
You write the script. You call it anything you want to. Showdown in Mojave, the extermination of Mickey and Mallory. And I'm going to give you my two best men, Kavanaugh and Worcester.
Oliver Stone's lacerating satirical style comes across in scenes like this one, where Mickey checks out his ratings.
The episode we did on Mickey and Mallory, it was one of our most popular ones.
You ever do one on John Wayne Gacy?
Yeah.
Who got the higher rating?
He almost blew him away. Yeah. What I want to get to...
About Manson?
Manson picture.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty hard to beat the king.
I want to see Natural Born Killers a second time. The first time it verges on visceral overload, and you have to stand back to find the satire and comedy that's interlocked with all of that violence. But of course, if satire doesn't go beyond its targets, it doesn't work. It has to be more excessive than what it's about. And in a time when the Bobbitt and Simpson cases win big network ratings, Oliver Stone is showing how crime and showbiz have become unholy partners. This is probably the most far-out, challenging film yet made by Oliver Stone, who is not known for his restraint. And I think it's some kind of a masterpiece.
I saw it a second time for just the reasons you're talking about, and it's worth doing because I was once again impressed by the visual techniques that are employed here. And he does have a couple of good ideas. Television is the root of all evil in many other ways than just violence. By his most brilliant sequence is the parody of a sitcom.
Oh, with Rodney Dangerfield as the abusive parent.
Parent to the girl in the film. Now that's brilliant. And showing that we have a laugh track mentality running throughout anything that comes out of the box. We'll just sit there and take it and take it.
Amazing. And he points out, for example, that Dangerfield does and says extremely hurtful and negative and wounding things, and because the audience laughs, it helps show how so much of this humor of pain in sitcoms is really not as funny as the soundtrack makes it sound like.
That's, to me, the most sophisticated part of the movie. The weakness of the film, for me, is in its third act. Once they go to prison, and you get this Australian Geraldo, wonderfully played by Robert Downey Jr., you know, interviewing them and manipulating them for ratings. That gets a little old. We get the idea of that real quickly.
See, I like that. I like that because it shows where tabloid television is going. I mean, eventually you are going to have, if they get footage of murders taking place during a show, they'll run it, and people will watch it.
I think that's going on now.
And that's going to happen.
Oh, I think that's going on right now. Well, but in other words, I think we all understand that this is as trashy as trash gets. I'm talking about within the movie. I felt that run on.
Well,
but it's a good film.
Well, okay, then it is a good film.
Yeah, okay.
The number 8 film on my list of one of the year's most controversial movies, Oliver Stone's blood-drenched epic, Natural Born Killers. The movie was about how the mass media exploit tragedy by glorifying a couple of serial killers. It was only a coincidence that the movie was released at about the same time the O.J. Simpson case captured all the headlines, but real life provided it with an ironic counterpoint.
I'm not saying, you know, I believe in mass murder, but don't get us wrong.
Yeah, you know, we respect human life and all.
But if I was a mass murderer, I'd be Mickey and Mallory.
What Natural Born Killers said was that violence has become sexy in the mass media, and celebrities become so mesmerizing to us that it doesn't matter what somebody's famous for, just so they're famous.
Oh, I like the picture, too, and I do really admire the mix of visual styles that are used in this picture. I think that's a really tremendous achievement and shouldn't be underestimated. The only part is I think that when they get to prison and in the back act of the picture, I think the film, which has gone over the top
Didn't like
before.
the stuff with Tommy Lee Jones.
I just think a lot of that stuff and some of the interviewing stuff I think just was too much. I would have taken an edit to that picture and maybe saved 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, I would have kept it.
Still a very good film.
Okay, I'd keep it the way it is. Our first film is Oliver Stone's new biopic named Nixon, and its most surprising element for me is how much empathy the film generates for the disgraced former president. Oliver Stone makes no secret of his left-wing convictions, and going into the movie, I think I basically expected to see Attila the Hun in a suit and tie. Instead, I found a fascinating portrait of a complicated, secretive man who made big mistakes but also made big achievements. The film centers, of course, on the Watergate scandal and how the efforts to cover it up led to the resignation of a president. Anthony Hopkins plays the former president, Paul Sorvino is Henry Kissinger, and James Woods and J.T. Walsh are Haldeman and Ehrlichman.
I never suggested that a bunch of imbeciles break into a psychiatrist's
Doesn't
office.
matter, Henry. The point is you might lose some of your meteor darling halo if the meteor starts sniffing around our dirty laundry.
Sir, I never had anything to do with that, and I resent the implication that
Resent it all you want, Henry. But you're in with the rest of us.
Nixon's great accomplishments in office were recognizing Red China, signing a nuclear treaty with Russia, and presiding over the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam.
Henry's getting strong signals from the Chinese. Now, they fear the Vietnamese more than the Russians, and they're worried about a united Vietnam. Now, if we stick it out, we'll end up negotiating separately with both the Chinese and the Soviets, and we'll get better deals than we ever dreamed of from both. That is triangular diplomacy, gentlemen.
The movie paints Nixon's private life as one of repression and secrecy and portrays his wife, Pat, as his most clear-eyed and outspoken critic. She's played here by Joan Allen as the person who knows Nixon the best, sees through his defenses, and yet maintains her own.
I have always stood by you. I campaigned for you when I was pregnant. During Checkers, Ike wanted you out. I told you to fight. This is different, Dick. You've changed.
Anthony Hopkins is very powerful in the title role, and he wisely doesn't try to do a Nixon imitation. He suggests Nixon rather than impersonating him, and the result is powerful, almost Shakespearean, a performance of a man who tastes both glory and the ashes of his own self-defeat. This is one of the best films of the year.
I think so too, Roger, and I think that you're right in describing how Hopkins approaches the role, not mimicry, but the emotion, the being, the uncomfortableness of this man. Joan Allen probably is the lock to win Best Supporting Actress for
she's fabulous
for
in this
playing
film.
Pat Nixon. It's uncanny and looking, but also feeling the brittle kind of quality there. I think the movie's a little tougher on Nixon than you're suggesting. You seem to suggest even-handedness. I think the sins are in clear relief here. But what is great is that a bigger picture is drawn, a psychological portrait. It's all there on screen. That's
You're
the
right.
greatness
Well,
of the
I
film.
didn't mean to suggest the movie is easy on him. What I'm trying to suggest is that it creates empathy.
Well, it's poetic about the flawed man, and
Yes,
that's
it
what I
is,
like.
yes.
Okay.
Fourth title on my list is Oliver Stone's Nixon. And this film, like Scorsese's Casino, combines fact and imagination into a story that's both documentary and dramatic. Anthony Hopkins stars in the title role as the American president whose lifelong pattern was to somehow find defeat at the end of every victory.
They're very serious charges, sir. First, abuse of power. Yep. Second, the obstruction of justice. Yeah, what else? Third, the failure to cooperate with the Congress. Yeah. And last, bombing Cambodia, sir.
They can't impeach me for bombing Cambodia. The president can bomb anybody he likes.
That's true.
Stone begins his film by saying some of the scenes are hypothetical, but there's been criticism of his historical accuracy. I think Stone's responsibility as an artist is to remain true to his own vision. Stone is obviously a man who thinks something went wrong in the 1960s and has never been right since, and in 6 films, JFK, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, Heaven and Earth, The Doors, and now Nixon, he has painted a portrait of that decade that is a remarkable achievement. This movie is about how Stone sees Richard Nixon, and as a filmmaker, he has a right and even a responsibility to make it just that way.
Well, that's the position paper on Oliver Stone, and I think he's done a terrific job, and I like his films are about something. Let me return to this picture. Okay. It is even higher on my list, and what I particularly liked about it is the fact that he went for a big target, a psychological portrait of a man who frankly has been scared to death by his parents with all the faith that they put into him, but no human feeling, if you will. And internalizing that and feeling he's got to somehow survive, he punishes the rest of the world with some of his actions. And the fact that he is playing on the largest stage of all, the presidency of the United States, his actions affect millions of people in other countries. There are plenty of people who come home from work, get a little drunk so they're ticked off at work, and they are tough to their wives. And I think that this whole psychological portrait of a kind of a guy is very interesting.
This is a movie that's an act of imagination that helps us to try to understand not only this man, but a lot of men.
You take
and
the,
that's
you
what's
take
good
the
about
arguments of the naysayers on this picture, and they haven't seen the picture, by the way. They're the arguments that are anti-art. They don't get what art is all about.
One of the best movies of 1995 was Oliver Stone's Nixon, a complex portrait of a complex man. The movie played at 3 hours and 10 minutes in theaters, but Stone says his original cut was 4 hours and 15 minutes long. And now, for the movie's release on home video, 20 minutes have been added at the end in a special edition. Some of the new footage is relatively minor, like this scene as the White House limousine pushes through crowds of Vietnam War protesters outside the White House.
Jesus! Get that little pony! Hey, tackle! Go on, get him! Yeah, reminds me of my days in Whittier.
But there is one extended sequence that's fascinating, showing Nixon in a very carefully worded exchange with Richard Helms, head of the Central Intelligence Agency.
It involves some old and forgotten papers, things I signed as Vice President. I want the originals in my office, and I don't want copies anywhere else.
You're referring, I believe, to chairing the Special Operations Group as Vice President.
That's Anthony Hopkins as the president and Sam Waterston as the powerful CIA chief who all but blackmails Nixon with veiled threats about the information he holds. Nixon is a great film with undertones of another great American movie biography, Citizen Kane.
It's now available on home video with the additional 20 minutes of footage in the special edition.
This production of Evita has been a very long time arriving on the screen. It went through many previous directors, producers, and stars before finally being directed by Alan Parker and starring Madonna, Antonio Banderas, and Jonathan Pryce. But watching the film, I think this is just about the best movie version of Evita we could have hoped for. Madonna was sure she could play the woman of the people who rose from a humble background to help make Juan Perón the president of Argentina, and Madonna was right.
There is only one man who can lead any workers' regime. He lives for your problems, he shares your ideals and your dreams. He supports you, for he loves you, understands you, is one of you. If not, how could he love me?
But was Evita all that she seemed? We're given a character named Che, played by Banderas, who acts as sort of a commentator on the action, turning up throughout Evita's life to ask difficult questions.
She had her moments, she had some style. The best show in town was the crowd. Outside the Casa Rosa, the crime never paid on.
As Juan Perón, Jonathan Pryce creates a man who is essentially a cipher, as he should be. The suggestion is that voters of Argentina were so in love with Evita that they voted for her husband out of idolatry.
And when you think about it, can you recall the last time they loved anyone at all?
At the heart of the movie is Madonna, as an enigmatic mixture of populism and social climbing, sincerity and show business.
I love you and hope you love me. Don't cry for me, Argentina.
If there was a weakness in the film Evita, I think it's with the original material. I thought Madonna was charismatic and convincing, Banderas and Pryce were well cast and effective, and Parker's production was visually enthralling, but I left the movie as I left the play, wishing somebody would tell me what Evita was really trying to say.
Well, I think you're right on target in terms of that as politics, as journalism, which is, of course, our attitude toward anything that we see as newspaper guys. We don't learn that much.
No, you don't learn a thing.
So then it is pure musical, and as a pure musical, it's very effective. The decision to make it all singing is a smart one. So it works as a piece. It's good looking. She's charismatic. Banderas is good. I happen to like I Could Be Really Good For You. That song, I think, is very well done. And I liked it.
I liked it. I just don't feel that I learned anything very much about Argentina, about Juan Perón, about Evita Perón, or Eva Perón.
No.
And don't you feel, though, that Andrew Lloyd Webber, I mean, in Phantom of the Opera and some of these others, he gets one song. And you know, a score used to mean like maybe 20 songs, you know. If he gets one song, he figures it's time to start rehearsals.
Well, I take him on a case-by-case basis. Now, my choice of a bad directing picture is Oliver Stone's U-Turn, which wants to be a comedy, but comes across as just a series of empty, violent scenes. Sean Penn plays a loser who stumbles into an Arizona town and gets caught up in a murder plot by an angry husband, Nick Nolte, targeting his wife, Jennifer Lopez. This film has the same highly stylized violence as Stone's Natural-Born Killers, but without that film's intellectual content. U-Turn seems like Stone's attempt at a commercial hit, and he failed miserably.
I agree, too, and I also think probably we penalize a guy like Oliver Stone because he's such a brilliant director, and when he makes great films, they're so important to us that we're disappointed when he seems to take a holiday with a film like that.
Well, yeah, because, you know, it's one film, it's one good film he isn't going to make. In other words, it's 2 years out of his life, or whatever it was, a year out of his life, and
For what? Al Pacino tries to talk his discouraged team back to life in that halftime scene from Any Given Sunday, Oliver Stone's new movie about professional football. Pacino is a veteran coach in a desperate bid for the playoffs and under pressure after 2 star quarterbacks are injured, and he has to rely on an unproved third-string hot dog who may not even really know the playbook.
Touchdown, Miami.
I'm telling you right now, I don't know what he's doing. I didn't call that play.
Pinpoint passing by Beeman means points for the Sharks.
Jamie Foxx plays Willie Beeman in a dazzling performance that takes the character on an emotional roller coaster. And LL Cool J plays a team member who complains the new quarterback is threatening his own chance of a year-end bonus.
The guy comes in, he's dissing this play, he's dissing that play. I got a better play. Hey, guys, we won. You know, what's the point here? The point is I'm trying to get paid. That's the point. No, the point is if we don't win, you're not going to be able to do your chip and dip commercials, okay? What do you know? You're an offensive coordinator.
The coach decides to start his veteran in the playoffs, and that gets him into a shouting match with the team owner, Cameron Diaz, who inherited the job when her dad died.
You will start Willie on Sunday, and you will make the adjustment to modern times.
You don't tell me what to do. Nobody tells me what to do. Your father never told me what to do.
I'll tell you
You're
this.
not going to
I will
start,
cut
young
my...
lady.
The dramatic scenes in the movie are very good. Unfortunately, the football footage is shapeless and confusing. It's a long movie, but the characters and their stories still seem shortchanged by the razzle-dazzle visual overkill. Less football and more comprehensible football, plus more dialogue, and Any Given Sunday would have been a better football movie. So I'm just giving it a marginal thumbs up.
I am also giving it a marginal thumbs up, although, you know, I couldn't help but think during this movie, especially during the football scenes, that Oliver Stone was directing this film. I mean, when the sound would go down, you'd start hearing an Indian shaman chant while the players were playing. It was like, this is Oliver Stone. You can feel him here, you know. I think the plot of the film, the arc of the story, just didn't really do all that much for me. But as a smash-mouth football film, it reminded me of like the old Chewy Hart Chinese ghost story films. It's not real football, right? But then nothing in film is real. This is sort of like Oliver Stone's fantasy world where football is this extravagant, gigantic mess of people hurling bodies every which way.
Well, that's all you see, though. You don't get any idea of the strategy of the game.
No.
I agree that Oliver Stone is a great director. I think one of his problems here is that all sports movies have the same arc.
Yeah.
He's kind of doomed there to follow a genre that has been set in stone for ages.
But I was sort of expecting from Oliver to maybe break that a little bit, you know, and he didn't really break too much from here.
Nope.
Oliver Stone's new epic, Alexander, is, I am very sad to say, a disappointment in every way. I have great respect for Stone, a director who never stops reaching for greatness, but this biography is confused and unfocused, and as Alexander the Great, Colin Farrell never comes sharply into focus. His life seems to be torn between three great loves. His mother, Olympias, played by Angelina Jolie, is a woman who hates and fears her husband, Philip of Macedonia.
He will never give you the throne now, Alexander. Never.
His lover since childhood, Hephaestion, played by Jared Leto, as a mixture of masculine and feminine appeal.
They say it was never meant for you to be king of Asia.
Naturally. They want only to return to their homes rich with gold. But I've seen the future, Hephaestion. I've seen it now 1,000 times, on 1,000 faces.
And Alexander's Asian wife, Roxanne, played by Rosario Dawson, who he marries as a gesture to show his solidarity with the people that he has conquered.
In Persia, you are a great king. Here, they hate you.
The battle scenes have a fierce energy, especially in India, where Alexander's armies face terrifying elephant charges. Two things bother me about Alexander. The movie lacks a clear storyline with its arbitrary flashbacks and scenes containing more information, names, and places that we can possibly absorb. And I have no idea what the movie thinks about its hero. At times, he's an idealist trying to unite the world and absorb its civilizations. At other times, he's sexually confused and petulant. It was common at the time for men to have both male and female lovers, but Alexander seems to almost resent Roxanne, and the movie tiptoes around his relationship with Hephaestion. They hug a lot. The battle scenes are effective, but what is the movie trying to say? Thumbs down.
Well, I have to agree with everything you're saying, especially about the way they're flipping back and forth in time, because at some point, Angelina Jolie and Colin Farrell are the same age. Yeah. It's amazing. She's his mom. They're the same age. And yet, I'm giving it thumbs up because it's just a wild, glorious, wacky mess that I found really entertaining. I'm sure the historians are going to howl, and I don't think Colin Farrell is the right person to play Alexander the Great. He's Alexander the Pretty Good. You know, you don't really see, I mean, he's not like Russell Crowe in Gladiator, which I think was what Stone's going for. And yet I was entertained throughout, often in a campy fashion. I'll give you that. I mean, Angelina Jolie with the accent
and her pet snakes.
And the snakes, which maybe she brought herself onto the set. I don't know. And you can almost see the tattoos, you know, covered by the mod. But I found that wildly entertaining. Same thing with Rosario Dawson.
Let me tell you, Well, Rosario Dawson is a beautiful woman.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad you're giving it a thumbs up because I have the greatest respect for Oliver Stone, and the guy doesn't play it safe.
He will not bore you. He will never
not bore you.
safe.
I felt so bad that I didn't like this movie, but I have to be honest, I didn't. And I'm not sure
I understand.
what the point is. I mean, I don't know what he thinks about Alexander.
No,
I
we
don't know
really...
what we're supposed to
you
think
have
about
a movie
Alexander.
that's almost 3 hours long, and you really don't get to know too much about Alexander. He gives these big speeches like he's Bill Parcells at halftime, rallying the troops. And, of course, the battle sequences, as always, the leaders always get to meet in the middle of the battlefield.
It's fashionable to put down actors like Charlton Heston, but he knew how to wear a toga and carry a sword. He really did.
I'm still recommending it for what it is.
Okay.
And I think in the end he conquered his fear of death. He was the most fearless man I've ever read about. But the film will be seen. It's going to open around the world, and I think that so many people know about Alexander, they're interested in it, they will see it. Alexander is the first king in history, Roger, who was seen by and evidenced to cry over his dead soldiers, to know each and every one, to weep for their family.
Are there any parallels that we can learn from?
Alexander would have gone after Osama bin Laden. Alexander is famous for winning every battle, and he was ruthless at that point, and those were when the massacres occurred, and that worked.
You're here, George. This movie must have been physically grueling. I mean, when you contemplate a project like this, you realize that in addition to everything else, you are putting yourself on the line for a lot of hard physical labor. It's daunting. It's the biggest film you've made.
Pressure was huge to sanitize the violence and the sex and the storyline. If we give into the American way of life completely and say we have to do things the American PG way, then we're because the rest of the world is going to become a PG Disneyland, and I don't want that to happen. I don't think anyone does. You resist those pressures or you don't. Most people have to cave. The system wears you down. It's not like you're a heroic you have to be heroic for 1,000 days. You can't be heroic one day. I mean, if you're going to spend 4.5 hours killing Bill, you got to grant that Alexander deserves some space, you know.
World Trade Center. Now, this movie, I think, has a real chance of getting a nomination for Best Picture. I also believe at least 2 of the stars should be nominated for their acting. In perhaps the most conventional, straightforward movie of his career, Oliver Stone recreates the events of September 11, 2001, as experienced by 2 New York Port Authority officers who were summoned to the scene after the first tower was hit. Nicolas Cage plays Sergeant John McLaughlin, a 21-year veteran. Even as they were risking their lives, McLaughlin and hundreds of other rescue workers really didn't know what they were dealing with. After McLaughlin and Michael Peña's Will Jimeno are trapped in the rubble, much of the focus shifts to their families. Maria Bello gives one of the best performances of her career as McLaughlin's wife. I think Bello deserves a Best Supporting Actress nomination, as does Maggie Gyllenhaal, who plays Peña's wife. Now, maybe you don't want to relive these events, even though this is actually an uplifting story about survival and about resilience in the face of a terrible horror. That's your choice, but you'll be missing what I think is one of the best films of the year. So for me, thumbs way up.
It's a tough movie to not like. It's well made. The thing that you walk away with, though, aside from like the incredible story, which I had not known going in, it's strange because you're sitting there watching this movie and you're like, I thought I saw Oliver Stone's name, but it doesn't feel like any Oliver Stone movie you've ever seen. Like, doesn't look like it. Nobody speaks like they do in an Oliver Stone movie. It's not shot like an Oliver Stone movie. It's a pretty straightforward telling. And if you took his name out of the mix, like, you would never know that.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, there's one kind of strange shot. One of the guys has this sort of hallucination of Jesus with a water bottle.
That's the closest thing.
Which is very Oliver Stone-esque. And then I was reading about this, Kevin. That guy actually had that, you know, vision of that. So even the one strange kind of a Stone-esque touch, if you will, is based on the facts.
Totally. And we got to give props to Nicolas Cage. Cage, who for the first time in I don't know how many years gives the most believable and subdued performance I've seen him give in a movie. You'd almost want to bury him in rubble in future films to keep his performance level.
Seriously though, I was thinking the same thing. Now here's a guy, Nicolas Cage, who again I love as an actor because again takes a lot of chances on screen. But here's a guy who, the mannerisms and the vocal tics and the things he does as an actor, sometimes they don't work for people, but he takes a lot of chances. And for this movie, he's almost in this coffin-esque type of, he can't move.
It's a true performance.
And it's just his face.
You forget that it's Nicolas Cage. I mean, yes, he's buried in rubble, so it's hard to see that it's Nicolas Cage, but even before it gets to that point in the movie, you're like, wow, this is like Nicolas Cage dialed way back, and he gives a really, really believable performance. So I was happy with it.
Glad to hear so.
It's been a long haul, gentlemen. Ladies, now, I don't care what happens now. How many damn votes we do or don't get in the UN. So come Monday morning, 10 a.m., I'm giving Saddam and his 2 sons 48 hours to get out of Dodge, okay?
Indeed. Just as every American should exercise his or her right to vote on November 4th, they should also exercise their right to go see an important and extremely entertaining film. Director Oliver Stone's W stars the sure-to-be-nominated Josh Brolin as George W. Bush.
But truly, deep down inside, you know I'm a guy like you. A guy you can trust.
Fabulous. Fabulous, Doug. What it all comes down to is who Joe Voter wants to sit down and have a beer with. And guess who that is?
Just remember, make mine non-alcoholic.
Stone's bold abandonment of a traditional linear narrative helps create a rich character collage that truly makes you understand this man and almost empathize with him.
After 9/11, what would you say your biggest mistakes would be, and what lessons have you learned from them?
No, I wish you would have given me this written question beforehand, John. So.
Stone leaves no stone unturned when rounding out this supporting cast with phenomenal performances, including Jeffrey Wright as Colin Powell, Richard Dreyfuss as Dick Cheney, and James Cromwell as Bush Sr. It's rare when a film about a U.S. president is released while that president is still in office, so it will surely be a conversation starter. So be sure to see it before you talk about it. That's my take on the film, and now let's throw it to the Critics Roundup. We've invited film experts from around the country to join in on the conversation. Joining Ben and me today is Matt Singer from IFC and Christy Lemire, film critic from the Associated Press. Welcome, everybody. Let's start with you, Matt Singer. As you know, I feel like Josh Brolin will get an Oscar nomination, but let's talk about the rest of the supporting cast. Who really stood out for you?
I liked a lot of the supporting performances. Richard Dreyfuss as Dick Cheney, Jeffrey Wright as Colin Powell. The one that I had a little problem with was Toby Jones as Karl Rove. I think he went a little overboard with the look-alike makeup. He felt, to me, like the love child of the real Karl Rove and Quatu from Total Recall. I was very unnerved every time he was on screen, but I agree with you. Josh Brolin is really, really quite good in the film.
Singer keeping it political with a Schwarzenegger reference. I like that. Christy, let's go to you. What are your thoughts on the cast?
Yeah, Brolin's great in it. It would have been very, very easy for him to lapse into caricature by playing George W. Bush, but he's solid. Richard Dreyfuss, I think, is maybe the best one in this, in that his Dick Cheney, again, could have been over the top. He looks like him, he sounds like him, but he's also really acting. He has that one great monologue that really stands out. Tanya Newton, totally over the top as Condoleezza Rice, down to the gap between her teeth, it's so bad. But James Cromwell really gets the essence of Poppy Bush, I think.
Ben, it's no secret where Oliver Stone's political allegiance lies. However, do you think Republicans will be able to get into this film and enjoy it as well?
I think one reason why this movie works so well is that Stone didn't do what we might expect him to do, which is take a hatchet to George Bush. This movie is really a character study, and in a sense, Stone lets Bush be Bush, or rather, lets Josh Brolin be Bush, and I think that's what really makes this work.
I agree with you, Ben. It's fair and balanced, if I may. You know, you could have made him look like a total idiot, and you don't. And I think whatever you thought about him going into the film, you'll probably be thinking the exact same thing going out of it.
I agree with you, Christy. Your sort of expectations going into the movie are not really reinforced by, say, by Oliver Stone's agenda, if you will. And I want to talk about the political ramifications of this film and its release date, because it was really sped up to be released in time for the election. So, Matt Singer, let's start with you. How's this going to play out on November 4th?
It does strike me as sort of odd because as you say, it's a sympathetic Bush. It's surprising in that way that you think that because the movie was rushed to get done in time for the election, that there would be this sense of urgency about the message of the movie, and I don't think that's there. I think it is a very sort of conventional rise and fall of an American, person kind of biopic.
Well, I disagree with you enormously in that regard, Matt. I mean, I think it is a conventional biopic, but I think it is incredibly relevant because he's a sitting president, and I think what makes it work so much is there is no hatchet job. I think, yes, he's sympathetic, but it suggests that this guy lacked the interest or curiosity to become a great president, and that we have sort of suffered the consequences of that lack of curiosity.
But he comes off as a very simple guy, I think, to his core, which is what was surprising and also empathetic toward him. Like, all he wanted to do was watch baseball and drink beer. And there's nothing wrong with that. He wanted to go play fetch with his dog in the yard.
There's nothing wrong with that, but I think we now realize in 2008 that while that may be an okay guy to hang out with, that is not a guy we want running the country.
Right. No, he's totally in over his head, of course, and we see that from the film, and I feel kind of sorry for him, I think, because of it.
Time now for our ballots. Let's hit the voting booth. Matt Singer, see it, skip it, or rent it?
Well, I really enjoyed a lot of the performances, but to me it really did feel sort of like a conventional biopic or a TV movie, so I have to say rent it.
Christy, which side of the aisle do you stand?
Yeah, it is sort of a standard biopic in a lot of ways, but it surprised me in the empathy it creates and good performances. I had fun. I say see it.
Mank, we'll close with you.
Matt, who rents this movie? The election's in 2 weeks. See it now.
I agree. You have to see it, and I am the decider, so I say see it. All right, that's 3 for see it and 1 for rent it. So overall, we say you should see W.